Here, and this is a gun we haven't covered in a minute. The Czechoslovakian Vz.24. Quite a famous rifle from the interwar period. Very obviously a Mauser action. Chambered for 8mm, 8x57. And really one of the first guns to go for this intermediate length, kind of combining the best features of the Gewehr 98 and the Karabiner K98 from World War I. There was a whole host of rifles that had barrels between 23 and 24 inches, overall length of, 43 to 45 inches. And it all kind of started with this one. And these were produced for many countries before World War II. And even after the Germans occupied Czechoslovakia, they kept these in production for a time as the Gewehr 24T, G24T, to kind of supplement their Kar 98Ks. And the two really are similar, so much so that many people claim that when Mauser went to this pattern here, they took quite a bit of direct inspiration from the Czech gun. We've done videos in the past comparing Czech guns to, say, Russian guns. So let's now compare the German Mauser to the Czech Mauser, and maybe even kind of visit some others like the FN. Just talk about history and comparison of these guns, and maybe which was better, worse, strengths, weaknesses, production quality, and so on and so forth. So with that, let's go over to the other table and get a little more up close and personal. The Czech Vz. 1924's origins lie at the end of World War I. In 1918, after the armistice, the old Habsburg dynasty, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was broken apart, and thus the nation-state of Czechoslovakia came into existence, and it received an arms factory in the city of Brno, originally known as Skoda. It was quickly renamed and originally was under the control of the Czech government because, again, it was essentially war reparations, or just how they split it up. And at the very beginning, they had the Vz.98, which was a Gewehr 98. But already by 1919, they were experimenting and had small batch production of shorter versions. The 98, of course, had a barrel just over 29 inches, and so was, 50 inches long and rather heavy. The first Czech model really was the Vz.28-22, which was a long rifle, and it had updated, more modern sights and a few other changes. But they also had a short rifle, or a carbine version of it, but again produced in very small numbers. But after launching the 98-22, and this becoming really their first standard infantry weapon, they decided to make a short rifle / carbine based on this gun up here, the German World War I Kar 98, retroactively called the Kar 98A in the Weimar era. And this led directly to the Vz.23 and Vz.23A. And then those were improved upon to become the very first Vz.24 here. Now, the Vz.23 had a 21.5-inch barrel, but the Czechs learned, as Germany had before, that this barrel length really wasn't ideal for the 8mm cartridge 7.92 by 57. So they took a page from the Kar 98A. This has a barrel that's just over 23 inches, and that's what they gave the new Vz.24. Now, The 98A is a small ring, and they moved the trigger group to save a little bit of length. For the 24, they kept the large ring, and they didn't really mess with moving this. So this gun is a little longer than the original carbine or short rifle. This is just a hair under 43 inches, and this is approaching more like 43.5 inches. Not quite. But they did take a lot of inspiration. Obviously, this has the German-style sling swivels. They didn't do that. They did keep the flat butt plate. It has the flat type rear sight. It has the grasping groove here. Rear barrel band. This has 2 sling swivels. This just has 1, of course. But most notably, it has the full-length upper handguard, which the VZ continues. And the front barrel band is quite similar. It's different, but, you know, the shape and everything is similar. Same bayonet lug. Though the Vz.24 has a cleaning rod, and the 98A does not. It has a stacking rod. Interestingly, the kind of front sight protectors are a bit similar too. Yeah, to me, the front sight protectors definitely seem inspired. This is an open top, this is an open top, but of course this is removable easily, and this is not. Moving back to the rear barrel band, we can see another commonality. This is held on with a screw, and so is the VZs. I mean, it's a different shape of screw, but the idea remains, whereas the front band is clamped on here, and here it uses some more modern spring style. Now, another big difference, this has a turn down bolt with a flat underside that's checkered. This has a standard straight bolt handle. And I think they did this, and I could be wrong, but they wanted to be able to use the same bolt design for all of their guns, not just carbines and rifles. They were kind of going for commonality here with this gun. A one-size-fits-all short rifle with a one-size-fits-all bolt design. And otherwise, it's a Mauser Model 1898 action. Like I said, large ring with standard Mauser magazine. So this was adopted in 1924, and it entered into Czech Army service in 1926. Also around this time, the Brno factory was privatized, and that was so they would have an easier time with international sales, export customers. And this move really did pay off.
Hey everybody, it's Jay, and Misha wanted me to talk a little bit about my Vz.24 and put some rounds through it. So we'll put some rounds through it first real quick. And I'm on my short range, so it'll just be more about how the gun functions. So I picked up this gun because I really needed to have a Mauser in my collection, and K98s at the time were already getting to be pretty expensive. This Vz.24 in particular was pretty inexpensive. I think I paid under 300 bucks for it, and I think that goes a little bit to the condition, because you can see it's pretty dinged up, well worn. I would say the actual finish left on the gun itself is probably less than 20%, maybe even less than 10%. It's practically in the white. If you have seen any of my videos before, you'll know that in general I actually like the look of an old, particularly surplus gun that has some nice, honest wear to it. Not gonna say I would deliberately do this to a gun, but having one that just earned it over time. I actually think that these old types of worn guns are pretty attractive. This gun has worked 100% for me. I believe this is a 1938 manufacture, if I'm remembering correctly. And it has, in general, the Mauser look. Again, without being Mauser money, or I should say K98 money. So, I really like this gun quite a bit. I'm glad to have it in my surplus collection. And we'll cut back over to Misha.
Here's another Vz.24 out of the shop. A lot of these come in well used, but honestly still very serviceable. And that's because they were appreciated. One of the first export customers of note was Yugoslavia. In 1926, they purchased 40,000 Vz.24s. These were taken out of Czech military stocks. And then a couple of years later, they added another 10,000 to their inventory. The rifle quickly became popular in many South American countries, so much so that they chambered a large number for 7mm Mauser, 7x57, as well as 7.65 by 53, which many call Argentine, but it actually started off as a Mauser cartridge and was first used by Belgium. Hundreds of thousands went down there. They were used in the Chaco War in the early mid-30s. Another famous user would be Iran, Persia, who bought the first 30,000 Vz.24 short rifles in 1929. They liked them, so they placed another large order for 270,000. This would consist of 240,000 so-called 98-29 long rifles. They would have the 29-inch barrel, and 30,000 carbines. And this would evolve into the Persian Mauser. And the contract was not full and complete by 1938, but a large number had been delivered. Likewise, China would order a good number, about 195,000. They would use these. Many of these would also fall in the hands of the Japanese, who had been fighting theirs for a number of years. So much so that in 1938, the Japanese Navy placed their own order directly with Brno for 40,000 Vz.24s. Also that same year, 40,000 would be ordered by the Soviet Union, not for themselves, but to support Spanish Republicans fighting in that nation's civil war. Kind of an interesting roundabout history there. And these guns would just turn up all over the globe. But even though Germany couldn't produce guns in the 20s and early 30s, CZ Brno did have one major source of competition in the Mauser market. That would, of course, be from Fabrique Nationale Herstel in Belgium, FN, who was no Johnny-come-lately to Mausers. In fact, the whole reason for FN's existence, foundation, in 1887, 1888, was to produce the Model 1889 rifle for the Belgian military, which was the first true smokeless powder Mauser. And it was really the one that the Argentine 91 was based on. Anyway, after World War II, FN created their own Model 1924 pattern, And this wasn't so much for the Belgian military, but for export. So to that end, they did all kinds of versions and variants. They did this one here. This is a Venezuelan carbine in 7mm. They did them in 7.65mm, 8mm. Later on, they would even do them in 30-06 and so on and so forth. But it's a very similar gun, very similar stock profile. Still a 98 large reaction, flat rear sight. Originally, it did not have a sight protector. Standard Mauser bayonet lug. Pretty much, yeah, standard Mauser. And these were purchased by a number of nations, including Yugoslavia, who, after ordering some from FNH, actually would begin licensed production at Zastava as the M24. They were also ordered by China, who would make an unlicensed copy as the Type 21. And they pretty much went everywhere. Even France used some. And FN would not cease production of the Model 24 until the 1960s. And one of the more famous post-war contracts for it was to Israel, the IDF, who ordered some in 1950. So these are the two main kind of Mauser makers that were pushing the design. While they both would do a long rifle, they sold more and really marketed more the carbine or the short rifle. There would also be the FN Model 30, which I guess technically this is here, but yeah, the Model 24 and the Model 30 are extremely similar. And yeah, FN would do the turn-down bolt handle, although since they were making them for their customers, they did some with straight bolt handles as well. Heck, they even did a 22 trainer. And speaking of Yugoslavia, they called their Czech Vz.24s the model, or M24A or M24C. I've seen both, and they referred to the Belgian ones, it's just M24. Now the Belgian pattern's kind of what they went with, but when their own truly domestic M48 came along, while it was inspired by the Belgian, it did take some cues from the Czech gun, namely the full-length upper handguard, and a sight protector, although of course it's more of the German style. The Belgian one did not have it at all. Also, they didn't go with the inlet stock. They still did a turn-down bolt handle, but they just scalloped the bottom and turned it out as kind of a compromise. Kind of interesting. When older Belgian M24s were updated to the new kind of M48 standard, they were known as the M24-47. They usually get a new barrel and a new stock and a few other things. Likewise, when the Vz.24s were updated, they became the M24-52. So they definitely were kept in service well into the 1950s and 60s in Yugoslavia. And again, kind of influenced that nation's Mauser pattern. I don't know, I just find it kind of interesting how these things all kind of connect. And with that, let's get in to the Vz.24 during World War II. In 1938, the Nazi German government annexed Czechoslovakia, kind of forming a puppet state soon thereafter, known as the Slovakian Republic. And they would keep the Vz.24 around. So let's compare it with an early Kar98K, because it's a really interesting comparison. Germany obviously saw the success that Brno had between the mid-1920s and 30s with these rifles. In fact, by the time of the German occupation, they had built over 775,000, with a few more thousand kind of shipped out last minute, maybe as many as 10,000. And their Kar98 is very similar. Now, did they directly copy the VZ? No. But it is kind of parallel developments, because the starting point was the same. And it was just the idea that seemed to work. Both are chambered for 8mm Mauser. Both use the 98 large ring. Both have the same magazine. The Czech gun is a little heavier, and the German gun has about a 10mm longer barrel. So minor differences. Both use a flat sight, but looking in the front, we'll see some differences. Originally, the K98K did not have a sight protector. They both do use different length of cleaning rod. Same bayonet lug, very similar front barrel band, held on with a spring. When we come to the rear barrel band, we'll see a difference. Like I said earlier, this is held on with a screw, and it's further back. This one's is forward and uses the same spring, which is now double-ended. Also, we have a cutback upper handguard, whereas this is full size. This also does not extend behind the rear sight, whereas on the VZ, it does. So the VZ has a longer handguard, and it has actual swivels, whereas the German gun does not. At this time, the furniture is made from walnut, and early on, the German guns used hardwood too. Also, both have flat butt plates. Although the Czech gun has a little bit more of a bow to it at the top, it's a little more curvy. The German's a little flatter. The German also has the takedown disc and the standard German pass-through sling slot. Whereas then again, this one has the swivel down here and the one up here at the wrist, plus a cool unit disc. And of course, another big difference is the bolt handle. This is turned down, but unlike on the Kar98A, it has a round bottom, and there's the inlet in the stock for it. As with the VZ, still straight, no inlet. On the other hand, the VZ does have grasping grooves in the stock, and the Kar98K does not. So a very similar concept. As to which is better, it's really impossible to say. The fact that the Kar98's a little lighter. K98's about 9.25 pounds. This is under 9 pounds, depending on the model. Closer to 8.5, even with some, maybe. It really just depends. Quality of construction is very high. The Kar98K was first ordered in 1934, or rather, the German army wanted a new infantry weapon, and in 1935 Mauser came out with this, which is really just a shortened Kar98B, which was a long rifle that was made into a quote-unquote carbine because of the Treaty of Versailles. But the Germans obviously thought highly of the Vz.24 because after they occupied Czechoslovakia, they kept it in production at not only the Brno factory, but a secondary factory as well, giving it the designation Vz.24T. And we will end where we began with that Russian capture, Kar-98K. So yeah, they kept the Vz.24T, the Vz.24 in production. And one of the first beneficiaries of this was Romania. They had been interested in switching to this Czech rifle as early as the late 1920s, but they only purchased small numbers for various political and budgetary reasons. But in 1938, they had a major contract. And so these would be delivered to the Kingdom of Romania, who would officially join the Axis in 1941. Now, between 1938 and 1940, Czech-built Romanian Vz.24 contract guns would have the King's Royal Crest on them. And then after that, they would not. And many would be refurbished after the war and scrubbed. In the German service, they would start making a few changes. Originally, they would take the Czech guns they had as is, and then they would build many with, leftover pre-war parts. But as these ran out, they would introduce the German-style takedown disc to the stock and the German-style sling swivels. They would also, later on in the war, go from hardwood stock to laminate wood, as used on the Germans. And finally, they would go from the flat butt plate to the cupped butt plate on the G24T to kind of match K98 standards. And then finally, in 1942, first the secondary factory was ordered to just go ahead and quit making the 24 and switch over to a true K98. And then the following year, in 1943, the main factory at Brno was also ordered to cease 24 production and switch over to 98K. No one knows for sure how many of these were built, but estimates range from as low as 220,000 to well over 300,000. As for Romania, they also ended up with quite a large number, around 450,000. So between the beginning of production and when it was finally over, even in a modified form at least, in 1943, over a 19-year period, well over 1 million Vz.24s were built. And it was a very widespread gun because so many countries had adopted it. It moved around the world quite a bit. For example, ones captured by Russia, mainly from Lithuania, but also Romania and Germany, some of those ended up being given to the Vietnamese, who in turn used them during the Vietnam War against America. In Persia and Iran, after World War II, the Czechs would help set up a factory in that country so they could manufacture their own versions and refurbish their existing rifles. And they would produce a unique version known as the M49 carbine. In Romania, they would refurbish their guns and continue issuing them, first for troops, and then later for cleaning and just keep them in stockpiles. And in many other places, they would pop out throughout the 1960s and into the 70s. And of course, many are on the surplus market in America. Some of the earliest ones to come in were brought in by Interarms, who purchased them from multiple European nations, including Franco's Spain, who had held on to tens of thousands following that nation's civil war. Many more came from China, East Asia. And of course, in more recent years, many captured Vz.24s or G24s have come in from the former Soviet Union, namely Russia, and some have also come in from Romania, again, these being refurbished. And finally, many have come in over the years from Yugoslavia in either original or modified form as well. So definitely a far-reaching rifle, very good quality. And since Germany was not able to really produce for export Mausers, it left the door wide open for companies like FN and Brno, and they took full advantage of it. And it really helped put them on the map as a legitimate firearms manufacturer, which of course led to a whole family of guns. So, seemed like a good comparison to make, and just talk about the history a little more. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. As always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe, and if you'd like to help support the channel, please check out the link to our Patreon page. This is Misha, and we'll catch you very soon next time.